Right, okay, I'm going to start letting people in. As I said, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves because you've got way too many things about you that I for me to introduce you. So here we go. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well, wherever time zone you find yourselves in. For me, I'm in central Manchester, which is, so it's 10 o'clock in the morning, which is the most important place in the world. Just to let you know a couple of things. Firstly, this is being recorded. I hope that's all right. And secondly, if you want to add questions and stuff, put them in the chat rather than ask them, just because that will allow the flow to be more fluid. I'm really excited about this. Sorry, hi everyone. I'm Jerome de Groot. I don't know if you know me. I am the coordinator of a project called Histories at Risk. I'm just going to share some quick slides with you and let you know what's happening today. So this is Histories at Risk. This is an organization project that I've been running for about a year or so, which is about thinking about the complexity of contested history around the world and offering support and solidarity for people who are undertaking that history in various places, wherever they might be. It was inspired and originated about two and a half years ago with the Black Lives Matter protests in the UK, but it's kind of evolved in various different ways, and it's quite amazing to be able to welcome so many people from around the world today to talk about these issues. If you want to find out more, here is our website and here is our Twitter. Sorry, there are people entering. This event today and tomorrow is organised in conjunction with the International Federation for Public History, and we'll hear from Tanya Evans, who is currently the president of that organisation, in a moment to welcome us. We actually have 3 past and present presidents of that organisation in this session. It's quite high powered, this session. So we'll find out all the important stuff today. So yeah, I've organised this in conjunction with the IFPH, and particularly with Himna Perry, who is not here at the minute because it's 5 in the morning where she is. She will arrive this afternoon, and it's really exciting to have that group organisation. That kind of collaboration is really cool. A date for your diaries if you are interested in what we do and thinking about contested history on the 12th of September, at 2 o'clock on the 12th of September, another online session. My colleague May Maizier is going to be organising a discussion session about the history and culture of Eritrea and its relationship with Ethiopia. So that's going to be a really interesting session. So please do sign up for that. The link is there. I'll put it in the chat as well in a moment. And what we're going to do today is we're going to think about national organizations and public history. As I said, we've got 3 high-powered public historians here who are very, very eminent, but also really have been crucial in organizing and institutionalizing public history in Europe and around the world, turning public history from something which was very North American to something which has been much more global and much more focused on a diverse and more interesting way of thinking about things, in my opinion. So we're going to hear from Thomas and Serge, who are going to talk to us a little bit about their experience of organizing and thinking about public history from a national or institutional point of view. That's going to start in about 5 minutes when I stop talking. At 11, we'll start this workshop with Julia and myself. So Julia Laite had a network in the UK about public history theory and public history in the UK particularly. And as a result of that, we had a discussion at the end of that about whether we might want to set up some form of national body in the UK for public history. What we're going to do at 11 is a workshop about that. We're going to discuss the kind of pros and cons of that. We're going to think about how that might work, if it should work. And I suspect what we'll probably do is spend a lot of time arguing about what we'll call it. At 3 o'clock British Standard Time, Cedric Brousseau will be joining us from Canada, where he's going to talk to us about his work with the Ingenium Museum, and he's going to talk particularly about his Histories at Risk project and his engagement and development of projects with Indigenous peoples in Canada. So that's going to be cool at 3. I've got one more slide, yes. And then tomorrow we have 4 sessions. It's quite an amazing day tomorrow. Jimena has put this together, and I really, take my hat off to her. She's brought some amazing speakers together. We have sessions on public history in India, in Japan, and in China. And then at the end of the day, or beginning of the day, depending where you are in the world, we have a session on Colombia in Spanish. And I want to underline that entire session is going to be in Spanish. So if you don't have Spanish, well, join anyway and see what happens. It's going to be cool. Right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Right, hello, look at your lovely shiny faces. It's nice to see you this morning. I am going to turn over the session to Serge and Thomas. First up, I'm going to give you a brief moment to have Tanya, though. Tanya, you're up.
I'm a very brief moment, partly because I seem to be having this crazy coughing fit at the moment. I apologize for that, but I want to thank Jerome and Jimena for all of their amazing efforts in putting this event together. One of the remits, excuse me, of the IFPH is to encourage the formation of national organizations of public history and associations all over the world. So I cannot wait to hear about the discussions later. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go off in a bit because it's the end of my working week and later on a Friday night. So I cannot wait to hear more about what transpires, and thanks again to Jerome and Jimena for all of their efforts in this. And I apologize for having this crazy coughing fit. Sorry, everyone.
Are you all right, Tanya? Are you okay? Do you
No, I'm not. But I want to hear you speak, Thomas and Serge. So I'm passing over. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, so as I said, this is organized with the IFPH, and it's really nice to do that kind of collaboration. And what's been amazing about running this project over the last year or so is how global public history is, and how discussing these ideas is something that people will do across barriers, across borders. And part of the reason for that is the work of both Serge and Thomas in establishing and sustaining and expanding the International Federation for Public History. So I'm going to hand over to them to tell us a little bit about their experiences of putting this sort of stuff together. So who wants to go first? Serge, you want to go first?
But eventually it should be Thomas if we go down in the...
We're going to go in actual chronological order.
Yes. No, I can, of course. So I'm Serge Noiret. I'm a contemporary historian. I work in libraries and also in research project at the European University Institute in Florence, Italy, where I am at the moment with a lot of sun on the roof in my office. And it's 11 a.m. for us. And I will tell you something about how public history was spread in Italy, in the peninsula, through activities and the foundation of an association, the Italian Association of Public History. So when Thomas, who collaborated to the special issue of an important academic journal in Italy, which is called Memory and Research, Memoria e Ricerca, in 2011, we have published a special issue on public histories, now 12 years ago. And at that point, I wrote that public history in Italy was a discipline without a name, because public history was not yet used nor known as a discipline, a subfield, a Bourdieu field, if you want to say more about what is public history, not as a discipline. So let me say some words about the origins of public history in Italy and of the APH. So the AEPH, the Italian Association, was born, like exactly Tanya mentioned, as one of the goals of the International Federation. When I was president of the International Federation, we had our second conference of public history in Jinan in China. And in Jinan, we met, of course, many international historians, all the historians, this big conference of the CHIS, the Comité International des Sciences Historiques. Also, there is a translation in English. But there were a lot of Italians. And what was important were the Italians who were present in 2015, because as soon as I came back to Italy, in Florence, where I stay, they contacted me and they say we should do something, we should create an association. And the we was an important body, which is an organization who control, say about history in Italy. Academically, but also publicly, they promote Italy and they promote history in Italy. And the president invited us to do a meeting there in Rome, and it was in 2016. And so to have this association created in 2017, when we organized the fourth IFPH, and that was my last conference as president of the IFPH in Ravenna, in Italy, where we had the first conference of the Italian Association and the fourth one of the International Federation. We were more than 700 people. I remember that Tanya was there. We had everyone from public history worldwide. It was a real important conference, and that was the start of the association. So let me tell you about, I will share with you some slides if I can. So let me tell you that this is the field today. In Italy, the field is now well present, and as you can see, we used the English wording for public history without translating, like Portuguese, Spanish, South American are doing, also French are doing. We kept it for very good reason that are linked with the birth of the discipline and the association. Why did we this? Because when we decided to found a association which would deal with history in public and with the public, we had in the 90s a precedent, 92, 93, which was called the use of history in public. In Italian was uso della storia in pubblico. And it was something discussed at many conferences and used also for communication of history, history in different settings. But it was a lot about instrumental use of history for political purposes. So we decided to abandon this naming and went for public history because we wanted to institutionalize the association connected with what had happened at the end of the 70s in North America, Canada, and the US. So here you have, for instance, the impact of it's a very short research without capital and small letter for public history as such in all Italian books, Google and Graham. So you can see that when we founded the association, public history was not really a lot present. But of course, it was discussed because we discussed public history as something present in other countries, especially in North America. But once we founded public history in Italy, look at, we cannot go further than 2019 because of Google, but it will be even much higher today. So it's very important to know that our association, which will have the 5th national conference next month in Florence with more than 50 panels and also a festival of public history, festival with PH and not F as Italian. So we'll have this, and it takes a week. It starts on Tuesday and ends on Saturday. It's connected with universities. So The origins. So we may say that public history in Italy is a mix of a kind of activist public history that is present also because of the use of history in public. It's also based on what we are doing, especially in Italy. It's a lot present discussion around heritage institution, what you call GLAM in the US and the UK, and MAB, museum, archive, and libraries, biblioteca in Italy, especially about material and immaterial culture surrounding heritage institution. We have a tradition, and it was very important because it was done before public history in Italy, a tradition of public archaeology, and from medieval archaeology, public medieval archaeology, to industrial archaeology, especially in some areas of the country. And we had this discussion about what's the field, putting together many different disciplines like memory studies, museum studies, oral digital history, popular history, the communication of history. Of many masters on the communication of history in Italian universities. This is the field, the humus in which public history was born in Italy. So also the DNA is rooted in microhistory, local and microhistory, Carlo Ginzburg and Giovanni Levi, and also oral history, which is Italy is one of the key countries for oral history worldwide, with the works of Luisa Passerini and Alessandro Portelli, and also some influences, especially in communities and local areas, about anthropological and ethnographic methods. What is also very important, is different from other countries, especially North America, is that the whole Anthropocene is present. We are doing public history with all chronologies, from ancient history to contemporary history, and all past are discussed in the present and become present because of public history. So who are in Italy the public historians? We may say anyone who makes history in public but has some knowledge of methods, professional historical methods. We have also academic historians that from university, we call this the third mission, are doing public history outside universities after research and teaching. So the third mission of academics outside is spreading discussion about the past and history in public. We have an enormous presence of school teachers. In Florence next month, we will have a dedicated day where school teachers and their pupils will discuss about public history practices locally in their schools. And this is the first time, and it's national. We did a year-long activities with the school nationally the whole year, and we bring the best programs in our conference. And then we have the cultural heritage professionals that are really present in our discussion. If we have to say who are the members of our association, we have done a book of abstracts of the conference that never was, which was in 2020 in Venice. Everything was done. We had all the abstract, we organized everything, but then we had the pandemic. And we did this conference in Venice only last year, 2002, 3 years after. But when we analyze who were the people present in the conference, we see that we have a small majority of women linked to the academic world, and more or less we have a gender equality. We have mostly people dealing with contemporary history, although we had many panels on ancient history too. gender history, and study of cultural heritage during this conference. There are many projects also that are linked with digital humanities, digital history, and digital public history. So we have a lot of things together with other associations dealing with digital history, digital humanities, etc. And we have also all the diachronic teams. I will end now what I wanted to say to tell you about what we realized from 2017 to today. Of course, not all the conferences, the podcast, or what we have done, but some important things that I think characterize our association. First, we have done a manifesto of public history that we are rediscussing now to update it to the light of the existence of the association now for 7 years, 6 years. And it was discussed in a panel coordinated by David Dean at the IFPH in 2019 in Hartford. And we have there what are the goals, who are the public historians, what is the definition, etc., etc. We just succeeded to create an important network, and so we are now, like in the NCPH at the beginning of the 90s, in between a public history which is going towards academic and staying with a lot of other professions. We are really now looking at who will, you know, I don't want to say control, but will really say about the future of public history in Italy, because we created this inter-university center for research and development on public history. It took 2 years. Now we have it, it's signed. There are 18 universities and programs who signed this manifesto, and they will organize a first summer school in September in Italy, and they organize conferences. And also Thomas is there with us for the best practices of teaching public history in this important center for research. This is something that we took a lot of time to decide, all kind of different, you know, PhDs, masters, courses integrated to other courses, and so on. And these are where in Italy, we have a map where in Italy these are. We created, and this is okay for you to use because it's international, we create an electronic library of public history at the University of Salerno in open access, where we give an open access when you allow us to publish the full content of your essays. I say you because you are invited to contribute. We have also international authors, and it's a place where I think everyone can profit about contents and what is the historiography of public history, not only Italian. You have different languages, and everything, if you want to submit, is in bilingual. It's Italian and English. Like our conferences, they are always bilingual, Italian and English, and we have panel in English. There's no point about this. Then, an important, and I will end with this to allow for question and discussion. More recently, like I mentioned, we have approached the schools, and so for the first time next, not academic year, but the year for the schools, which starts in September, we will have a very important history manual for the schools with added 100 pages of public history practices, examples to use with the pupils at schools. And this is from, this manual is medieval, early modern, and contemporary. You have 3 different volumes with, in these 3 different volumes, examples of how to introduce public history as such in schools and in local in territories. It's okay. I don't want to take more time. I have some early examples of proto public history in Italy, end of the 90s, beginning of the new century. But I prefer to hear your questions and eventually to go further on some issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Serge. That's really useful. And it's really helpful to hear about the range of people involved and the ways in which you brought it together. I'm going to move on to Thomas next, and then we'll have questions afterwards as a kind of general discussion, if that's all right with everyone. So, Thomas, you're up. We moved from Serge, who was the president of IFPH, to Thomas, who also was the president of IFPH. It's all going on.
Okay, I will share my screen. Do you see my screen? Yeah, can you hear me well? Good. Okay, thanks. I'll be way shorter. I will basically launch a few questions for you. So my name is Thomas Cauvin. I live in Luxembourg. I'm not Luxembourger, but I do live in Luxembourg. And the most important thing is that we are hosting the next IFPH conference in September 2024. So that's the only thing I would like you to remember. We're going to publish the call in September, and you will have 1 year. It's going to be fully hybrid. That means that we're going to try to be as global as possible for that conference. I would like to question the very same, this very approach of do we need associations? Because I think the point is not only what kind of association, but do you want an association? There are pros and cons, and I would like to say a few things about that. And it's so good to see so many colleagues from the UK. And UK is basically, from Luxembourg, is one of the main places where we do collaboration with public historians. I'm very happy to see many of you here. I changed your title, Jerome. I hope you'll pardon me. So I don't believe in national associations. I will try to explain what I mean in that. So international organization for me is more fitting. So as Serge, who was the first president of the International Federation for Public History, I think it has been a very important platform to connect people, not so much to create national associations, although they have been helpful, but to connect people who have similar questions and similar ideas. And I will just agree with Serge and tell you to visit the website and see the different networks that we have, just to find out that other peoples must have the same questions that you do have. So Serge was talking about national associations. You have a few. One in the US, in Brazil, it's not an association, it's a group. You have one in Spain, in Japan. Michiero is with us today. Hi, Michiero. I put in blue the last one, so the Australian one, because it's the last one. I put the Italian one because I think, for me, this is the model of what a national, international association should be. I don't think the model should be to close yourself to one national network. And I think the Italians are doing that very well from the beginning, and also because of Serge, to open up, right? It's never only about Italians or for Italians. And I don't think that's what we should opt for. And I think for me, the Italian Association is the best model to mix that national, local, purpose, objective, and international discussion. The question is, do you want a British Association for Public History? And I mean, maybe not, but that's something I'd like to discuss. As you can see on the map of public history, it's very Western. So there's also this question of why that is. Although Latin America is booming in terms of public history, I think this is one drawback of public history, it's university control. I work in a university, Serge used to work in a university, there's a problem there. And I think that's something we should think when we create national association or not, who is doing that. And it's usually academics, and there has been a drawbacks for International Federation for Public History, something we need to to consider. So why or why not? Before the meeting, I was thinking about what I've seen as the assets, the pros and cons of having national associations. One is legitimacy, and I think the Italians do it well. Public history is not a plan B. And if you have a national association, stronger together, we can advertise for public history being good research, good engagement with the public, good participation. So having a national association could help. Connecting people from different profile and background, super important. And not working together as academics, but learning from librarians, from tour guides. I think this is a potential for a national association. Consistent training is something very important for me to train my students better than I was trained. And having a national association with discussion, guidelines maybe, could help us training our students better than I was trained at least. Also, I think national associations help having different understanding of what public history is. When I went to Madrid to attend the Spanish Association, it was very different from the North American Association in the US, right? And that's fine. I think that's why we also want to have these different approaches of public history, and having national groups can help diversify public history. But, and there are two buts. One is all associations are, as far as I know, controlled by academics. And control, I mean, who are in the board? Who is in the board of the International Federation for Public History? Mostly academic. Why? Because we have resources, time, and flexibility. And this is fine, but not fine, right? And national associations can reinforce that academic control, and that's not what we should aim for. And the last part, yes, no, why? I'm not in favor of national associations to support national, strategies, right? I think if you want national associations, they have to be at some point international or even transnational to, not to work in a closed circle. So those are my 2 cents about why or why not. Developing, and I know it's not a problem for the UK, but English is a problem sometimes. And I think national associations can help, resources in Portuguese, in Spanish, in Polish, in German. This is something that we could do. So not that much for your project of association in the UK, although you have, Welsh and Scottish, that could be part of it. But for international discussion, that's a key aspect. I'm going to be very short because I think it's less connected to what you want to do. Let's not forget that there is no one public history. There are public histories, and sometimes people who do public history disagree. If it's about communicating, if it's about social justice. So I've just put a few examples. They are not generalization, but I see them as examples. You may have different understanding. Someone working in a National Park Service in the US, same country, strongly disagrees with radical public historian challenging the state narrative. So you have different approaches, and having a national association should be inclusive of all those different types of public history. I mean, I've just put a few, like applied business history, didactics, historic preservation, and sometimes those people, they don't talk because they don't have the same objective. So I think if you want a national network, it should be as inclusive as possible. Don't define what public history is. For me, the International Federation doesn't define, right? I think this is something very important if you want a national association. And last, a few thoughts about the future of international public history. First, it's not up to me because I'm an academic. Most public history people work outside of the university. That should be part of the discussion. My 2 cents would be, I would like more interdisciplinary discussions, working with designers, working with memory studies. I don't think we work enough with this huge network of memory studies. International associations. And I think that the success of public history so far is also a curse. the success is because of university training. Universities are investing a lot in public history because they see the potential, which is great. It's also a curse because who again is going to control networks of public history? People who work with those resources. So that's something to be very careful with, because there's a strong boom in activism and radical public history that may not be included if only academics decide what public history should be. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope some of those questions made some sense.
Thanks, Thomas. Thank you, Serge. That was awesome. That was a really brilliant introduction to the various issues and concerns and questions, and also the positive aspects of this. I've got lots of questions. If you've got questions, put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand, obviously. But Linda has already put a question in the chat, which is quite a standard one for us, I guess, in some ways, but also kind of opens up the whole issue, which is, how do we just distinguish history from public history? What's the difference between public history and history? And I guess that goes right to the heart of what you're both talking about in terms of what the purpose of this collection of thinking is. So, guys, what's the difference between history and public history?
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, go on. I really want to hear you.
I will say only one thing, and I think Thomas will immediately follow on this. The difference is you have history in both, but you have public in public history. So public is the important concept, and I'm sure now Thomas can say more about. We had recently a very good book, Public in Public History, by Joanna Vojdon, and she is always organizing for the International Federation a summer school in Poland in the summer, and she published, she curated. There are more essays, but there is one specific, very important essays by David Dean introducing this volume, who will tell you about what is the public in public history and why public is important, because we do history with the public, for the public. You have many activities that are done only taught because we let the public and communities participating to the making of history and the reflection about the past in public. I think it's also okay for you, Thomas. Or...
Yeah, I mean, I never oppose public history and other types of history. For me, it's spectrums, layers. It's more or less public, right? Everything is public, but it's more or less. So I prefer working on those how to make history more public, right? It's all about objectives. So I don't oppose academic and public history because that's damaging, and who knows what's the limit. So I prefer thinking in terms of spectrums and layers of publicness, of participation. But it's a big question.
Yeah. No, but I didn't want to separate both. I made, especially in Italy, academics are public, but the problem is how public they are, like you said, and what they are doing with communities and for these communities. This is a central issue where you will find the field.
Well, I think it's really interesting. I mean, you're right, Thomas, to talk about international public history and to think about this as something which is not nationally bound, and I completely go with that. But also, if you talk to people who work in this area, whatever we might call it, in different cultures, different communities, they will have a very different version of it. You and Serge have described slightly different versions. You talked about various versions around the world, and what public means what history means publicly kind of differs. And that's fascinating. And one of the great things that the IFPH has done is kind of opened that up and brought those kind of differences into focus and allowed us all to see different ways in which this happens around the world and to think very much differently about the way in which we might approach our own practice. So Laura, you want to do you want to expand upon your question in the chat, Laura?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking a little bit about, Linda's coming and saying, well, what's the difference? What is it? Is it not all just history? And I guess I was reflecting a little bit on how the groups that I work with, community groups, artists, maybe, you know, museums to an extent, I don't think, it's not a term that I use a lot or I find those communities using a lot. For me, it's an academic term of how we understand history. It's useful in an academic space. I'm not sure if it's useful. I don't know. I've always had a slight tension with it, because what do we call this thing? We need a term, or we need a way of bringing people together across different sectors. But on the other hand, public history, I just wonder if it's a bit of an alienating term for those outside academia who think they're just doing history. I
completely agree. Yeah, we've been a bit saddled with it in some ways, and trying to. But one of the fascinating things about the discussion that last summer at Linda's network session was trying to work out what we might use as an alternative. And I think you're right. There's theory and there's practice, and those things are quite different. Julia, you had your hand up, and then I think Marlena and
yeah,
Victor.
It actually flows really well from Laura's comment, and it kind of supports her kind of thinking and concerns. And I think some of you have heard this brief anecdote before, so apologies. But when I took over the Raphael Samuel History Center, my idea was to change it to the Raphael Samuel Center for Public History. And it met with a lot of hostility from the gang at History Workshop, who arguably were some of the folks who were doing what we would now call public history within a British context quite early on. Not the only folks, but some of the folks who were doing it. And they hated the term public history. I never quite got to the bottom of why, but they said it sounds so institutional. Possibly riffing off the idea that this is a weird country where we call our most elite private schools public schools. I'm not sure. I think it had something to do with that. But it got me thinking a lot exactly along the lines of what Laura said, which is, if I was going to boil it down to my kind of convictions about all of this, I think what academic history needs to do is just consistently call itself academic history, and everything else is history. So actually the delineation is what's needed for academic history, and actually the rest of it is just history. I think that's a pretty radical stance, because we still actually do need to call it something, like Laura said. But I like to think that way, even if the words that we're using have to be a little bit more restrictive.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. I think that, we're going to have to bear this in mind. Marlena, you have a question about pedagogy for Serge. Where are you, Marlena? Would you like to ask that, or should Serge? Would you?
I've read the question. I've read the question. Just about what Julia and Laura said before. Public history is extremely popular outside academic settings in Italy. It's exactly the contrary. It's something that really liberates the possibility to have history present in public settings, and not having only peers writing essay for themselves and the academic career, where it is something very different, and opening also to new professions. This is also an important issue. We have, I've seen in the discussion that what are you doing something with the students? Are you looking at how students then enter the labor market with other? Yes. And we have people, people that are part of this labor market. They come from universities and history degrees, but they do other things in theater, in heritage, and as consultants. There are many things that are done, and that we try to look at. About public history of education, we have from 2019 published a manifesto of the public history of education, and it's slightly different because it involves other methodologies and other professional figures that came in the field, and also a different, public history is not a lot about definition. Well, you have already seen how much different it is, how different nationally, internationally we look at concept, people doing it. but it's about practices and about what we do with history. And what we do with history in Italy, it's an important part is because of the lack of interest from the government on high school teaching of history today, losing ground. You know, it's now history is taught at high school by civic professor. They do moral things, ethical things, civic issues, and not anymore history. So we are promoting history as a fundamental field to create an aware citizen today. And history is really fundamental. And it starts from the puppies. But people, we have programs for reading for young scholars of 6 years old, 7 years old, that we organize with the Italian Association of Libraries, for instance. We have these kind of things. And what is absolutely important, and this is also in this context of cancel culture, monument issue, toponymy, we have all these issues that are always local. It's global, but it's lived locally in territories, inside communities, specific communities. So these teachers, they are always aware that the families of their pupils are interested in participating in activities, for looking at the name of the streets in the neighbors they are living in, looking at which monuments are there and why you have this monument, and why can we do something more to explain to the public what these monuments are about, and if they still have a reason to be there today. So all these things are passed through history professor or other educator at the level of the schools. And we have a manifesto, and it's in English too, if you want to look at specific question dealing with this. But in Florence, if you want to come, you are welcome absolutely to come and to follow our conference in June. There will be a lot of activities with the schools.
Brilliant. Thank you, Serge. I'm going to move on to Emmy, and then we'll have a short break. So Emmy, you're up. Your last question for this session.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Emmy. So I'm a PhD student at the University of Manchester, but I'm from Japan. So I'd like to ask one question for each Serge, Thomas, and also kind of like one suggestion. So the first question is like, in the process of like developing the organization, the association in Italy, did you face like any difficulties, like facing criticisms from like other historians who don't really want to support like public history, like to develop? And because I'm asking because Noor told me that it was really difficult to create public history course in South Africa, because like some, other historians actually kind of criticize what public history is. So that's one question. And for Thomas, how can like IFPH support to develop like national organization? Because in Japan, yes, we do have this like network at national level, but it's not official yet. So I'm wondering how IFPH can actually kind of support like each country's kind of establishment of those kind of national organizations. And one question, not suggestion, is that like to make the website of like IFPH more accessible, I think it will be nice if we have like, well, not glossary, but like list of the name of public history in each country's kind of language, because when I type it in Japanese, we can't access to IFPH website. So that means like those who are working on public history in Japan, in Japanese, they can't really find this, website. So that's just one suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmy. Guys, responses to that?
You want to start, Thomas?
Sure. I mean, yeah, languages and translation, as you know, the translation of public is very problematic. And I think that goes back to your discussion about defining or not and how to define. I agree with Jerome that we need some common ground to discuss, especially if you want a national association. But I've never been keen on developing, defining too much public history. I think core values speak to our partners much more than the term public history. And I never really use public history when I work with my partners. But the word is reused by some archivists in Luxembourg, journalists. So it is used. But for me, the core values, making history more publicly available, making history more public participation about, making history more inclusive. I mean, those core values and core objectives for me are more important and may gather people who don't care about the name. Practitioners, they don't care. They do history, right? They don't care about if it's public, community-based, or so on. So I think this is a very academic discussion that we need for grant application, to talk to my dean and stuff like that, which is necessary, but not the core of the discussion. So to how the IFPH could support associations, well, I'm no longer in the board, so it's not up to me. I don't think the IFPH can support so much. What they could do is to connect people who have similar discussions. For example, Michio was talking with Serge, talking with Jesus from Spain about pros and cons of a national association, and we were discussing for 2 hours. This is what we could do. But the rest, I mean, the IFPH is, let's be honest, pretty small, pretty neat, but pretty small association. So I think that's where the IFPH could help. Yes.
First of all, I'm very happy to see you, Amy. After Atlanta in March, we were all together and we had a lot of very nice discussions. And yes, in Italy, especially at the start, I mean, before 2015, when we were launching public history, we had really a lot of hostility from academic historians. I say academic historians, but it's university historians, people teaching history in universities. This is my definition of academic historians. It's not negative as such. We had a lot. They say these people, they told about things that they don't know about, and that they want to say about publicly. So that was really infamous for us, and we had to really do a lot of things to show that we were professional in doing these things outside universities. And what also we succeed, how do we succeeded in this? We saw that these people, we even wrote in newspapers against public history, and I have all these articles. They invited us in history festivals, because one of the origin of public history in Italy are from the start of the new millennium, history festivals that are very important. And many important historians are talking publicly in these festivals. So they started to invite us to say about public history, and we have dialogues, and now we are accepted as such, although there are a lot of concurrence between associations. So we have other important history associations, and we try to have all these associations together to promote history in society as such. And it collapsed this year because of the biggest association we have, which is the one of contemporary historians. What is also, and this is the last thing I want to say, is that many people, especially working in GLAM institution, when we presented them the manifesto, the practice, showing what we were doing and how we were doing, they said, but look, we are doing this from 20 years, for 30 years, for more than 30 years. So we always did this. And now we have a name and a field and an association in which we can discuss all these different professions, they can discuss together, transdisciplinary. We have elaborated an important dialogue between professions that was not the case before the Italian Association of Public History was born. So these are more or less the state of the art today in Italy.
That was really useful. Thank you.
That's great, guys. Thank you very much, both of you. I'm gonna. This is awesome discussion, and the chat is really, really useful as well. And it's really, really interesting for what we're going to do next. So in about 5 minutes, I'm going to give everyone a bit of a break just to go and get some water, go for a wee, do some yoga, whatever you need to do. Looking at screens is not good for you for too long. So it's just about it's just about on the hour in my country. So give us 5 minutes wherever you are, and come back at 5 past the hour. And Julia and I are going to try and marshal some of these discussion points into a consideration of what we might do in the UK, possibly. But obviously we're going to avoid words like UK, Britain, public, history, all those things somehow. So anyway, guys, I'll see you in 5 minutes or so. Enjoy your break. Right, I hope everyone's stretched and comfortable and got more water, coffee, gin, depending on where you are, what time it is. Snuggling dogs, Victoria did right during a break. That sounds like a great idea. I think everyone should do that during breaks. That is the way forward, I think. So that was an awesome way to kick us off, and it's a really important set of ideas that were introduced to us just then. I was reflecting during the break about how whenever some people get together who work on public history, they will spend the first hour at least discussing what public history is and disagreeing fundamentally on this. And maybe that's kind of part of the point. So last summer, Julia, hey Julia, ran this amazing session in London, bringing together practitioners and academics and multiple other interested folk to talk about public history in the UK. And we did have a discussion about what public history was and what the term was and whether we should use the term. And at the end of that, over drinks, there was a discussion, and an interesting discussion, about whether we should think about bringing together these people who had a broad interest in history in sort of vague public ways, community ways, etc., and whether that should be kind of formalized in some way. Am I misremembering that, Victoria? No, sorry, Victoria, Julia. So that was the kind of the inspiration for this next bit of session. I guess one of the things that Victoria said in the comments was about the fact that there are lots of MA programs now, and increasingly in the UK, there is a kind of professionalization of what we call public history. There are PhDs, there are collaborative doctoral awards, there are MA programs, there are programs at undergraduate level as well, which on the one hand is really exciting and wonderful, and on the other, as we've already experienced, they're mildly problematic, because this is something which is being kind of instrumentalized, monetized, particularly by universities, and we might want to kind of query that and why that's happened, particularly in the UK in the last sort of 3 to 5 years. So if there's this kind of surge of I don't know, theoretical interest, is it useful then to start to think about institutionalizing that, and is that just a problem? As we've heard from Thomas, that might be something we might want to be careful of and wary of. As we've heard from Serge, it can also be really wonderful and useful and generative. So I guess what we wanted to do now is sort of just talk about this concept. Julia, do you want to talk a little bit about your network and what came out of that?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, and mostly what came out of it was questions. So I'll probably just ask some questions. So the network was an HRC network called, very simply, What is Public History Now? And I sort of put the small bid together because of this Google Ngram that I just shared in the chat, which very, very clearly shows that public history as a term has absolutely exploded in the UK in fairly recent times, which is in sharp contrast to it in Canada, the US, and Australia, but especially the US. And so I was just wondering about that. And of course, I was also tasked with starting an MA in public history at Birkbeck. Part of what Jerome was saying, this kind of, all these universities kind of jumping on this bandwagon. And it was handed to me. And then, of course, I noticed quite quickly that I was working alongside a whole bunch of other people who'd been handed these briefs or had come up with these ideas themselves, wanting to start these public history programs. And so I thought, there hasn't been a moment for us all to come together, whether we kind of came up through the ranks explicitly as public historians or got it handed to us or kind of found our way there. We haven't had a forum where we can all just get together and chat. And so that's the basic premise for the network. And that's what we did. We came together and we chatted, and then we had a few pints and started thinking big. Like Thomas says, it's always at the drinks where you make your projects and your big ideas. And so we started thinking, is it useful for there to be a public history association organization within the UK? And Jerome, I have a series of questions really that I can put to the floor, but if you wanted to come back in first, you're very welcome to.
No, I mean, the point I think is just for us to start talking about this and to see where we get. So if you want to kick off, and I'm going to steal from Serge directly. I think by the end of this we should have a manifesto, and we should be like taken to the streets and maybe, you know, demonstrating somehow in a very polite way. But yes. I think at the end of this, what would be really pleasing is if we could generate some kind of form of direction for action. But yeah, so but you go first, Julia.
Yeah, I agree. And so I think some of the things to consider, I mean, if we do protest, of course, we'll have to do so very politely or we'll be arrested. Welcome to the UK 2023. So, I mean, I think one question is just thinking comparatively across different national organizations. Like one thing I'd love to hear from folks who aren't based in the UK is what do they do? You know, what different things we've heard from Serge and Thomas, which is really, really helpful. But you know, is smaller organizations, what sorts of things do they do other than exist? What can we do within the UK? Specifically, I think, what kind of service or support can we provide that's not already being provided? I think that's an important question for me, you know, rather than just reinventing wheels. You know, what isn't there that we can provide? For one, I think one thing that we could potentially do, this is the one question I might have a bit of an answer for, is to provide support for folks like Corinne Fowler, who find themselves targeted. You know, if there was a kind of official organization that could speak out in support of historians in public, I think that would be extremely important. Perhaps filling a gap that some other major historical institutions in the UK right now are not filling. They're not speaking up in ways that I think they should. So what can we do, especially the other question in terms of service and support, what can we especially do for students, like Victoria asked? You know, what kinds of ways can we incorporate students and support students and alumni as well? But also, and this is a really important question for me, how can we support historians who are currently or always without the support of institutions? So historians who maybe community historians, maybe local historians, maybe family historians, or what have you, but who aren't in the GLAM sector, who aren't in academia, and you know, what can we do for them? I think that would be a really important question. And if the answer is not much, I'm not sure if it's worth starting anything. And of course, should we do it is a question. I think that's an important question. I'm starting to ask the question, should I do this or should somebody else do this? That's the other important question. Who should it include? Obviously, I think I support the comments already that says, you know, as inclusive as possible. But I share Jerome's concern that he put in the comments about, you know, if it becomes too open, not too open, that's not quite the right word, but there is a risk, I think, that heritage and GLAM can kind of take over and we lose some of the diversity, I think, as Jerome put it. Do we want to include heritage in the GLAM sector? I think absolutely, but we have to think carefully about how, and also, of course, public archaeology, who have their own sort of purview and organizations. How should it be run / governed, particularly if we're going to be making political statements in support of historians like Corinne? I think a governance structure is something to think about. What other institutions might support it, i.e. the Royal Historical Society, or is it better to go it completely alone? Does it complicate things to try to get other institutions on board? What stakeholders do we really want to bring on board, i.e. teachers and the Historical Association? I think that's a really important thing to think about, especially in terms of teaching. And it also goes to what we can do in terms of support. What's a reasonable timeline for such things? Very interested to hear from Thomas and others who've set these sorts of things up in terms of what, you know, is this a 5-year plan or what? And finally, and I think this is an extremely important question and probably one that UK historians, you know, can talk about on their own, but I'm also interested in hearing from other people outside. What's the capacity for this? I think it's a really important question in the current UK context where we've got, you know, very low morale across the sector right now, a lack of funding for institutions. You know, I don't know if we're going to find anyone who's going to give us money. And finally, a massive culture of overwork. And so how do we navigate that within the context of the UK, and for others who are working outside of it, how have you navigated that? So those are the questions that I've thought about that I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on, and I'll stop there.
Amazing, thank you, Julia. Those are fabulous ways to start. Rather than have a free-for-all, I'm going to put you into groups to talk about this. So all those questions that Julia has come up with, and all the questions that have arisen generally, I'm going to have you go into little wee groups and talk to each other, just to sort of generate some thoughts. So yeah, why, who, what, where, when, all these questions about
I've
this.
just popped all those into the chat,
And Julia's
just in case somebody wants to copy and paste them.
So yeah, I mean, just a sort of quick breakout room first, sort of 10 minutes or thereabouts to sort of just say hello to one another and start to network as well, start to get a bit of support and solidarity even in your little groups, because I know that particularly on Zoom, everything becomes quite big and no one's really talking to one another. So yeah, and then we'll come back and have a bit of a discussion about this and keep on going. So thanks, Julia, for introducing those ideas. I will put you into breakout rooms. I have to warn you, when I end the breakout rooms, you will be pulled back into the Zoom room in 15 seconds because my students are so well, they faff really. So basically I make breakout rooms a bit aggressive. So anyways, I am going to create, how many of us are there? There are 7 of us. There were that many of us. So okay, you're going to be invited into a room. I would advise you to take that invitation up. Oh, everyone's going already. Wow, that's fast. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Sorry, that was a bit, I mean, I don't know if your breakout room was anything like mine, you were just about to get started on actually discussing the important stuff. But that's the way it goes, I'm afraid. Would anyone like to kick us off in terms of what you've been talking about in your WE groups?
Jerome, I think that Matt and we have all the solution to all your questions.
Fabulous, thank God. Well, there you go first.
No. We had a conversation together. We were 4, but only 2 people. We discussed. So I don't know whether, but at the end, but Matt can explain it. We started to understand, to say two or three things. Once, that you are already an international organization if you want to start, because you are 4 parts of the UK plus the post-colonial, which are the islands that are left, and the cultural heritage you still have with Australia and Canada and other things. So you are already international, and that should be there. The second thing is that you have IFPH in London, which I think can be, it could be a parallel with what we used to have the Giunta Centrale per gli Studi Storici, the Central Junta for Historical Studies in Rome, that promotes history and historians at a national level and international level. And when we were created thanks to this, so we were immediately sure of a kind of institutional support. And when we met there in Rome, we created a scientific committee for the start with 18 different other associations: urban historians, oral historians, modern history historians, curators, museums, librarians, archivists, and so and so. And we were all there. And the question you raised, we raised this question in this setting. So I don't know if you have something, if IFPH could be, but I think if you want to start, you should not go private, but have some support at a UK national level.
Yeah, I like that idea. I'm gonna call on Ruth to say something about IFPH. Is that all right, Ruth?
Did I've said, because we had really a discussion with Matt. It's what we discussed, Matt. Or it's okay, or there is something more?
No, that's a good summary. I'm sure there's lots more to chip in, but yes.
So Ruth, do you want to talk about the IFPH briefly?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Ruth Latter. I am very new in my role. I've been here for 2 weeks, so this is kind of me coming at this brand new. I am their new Lecture in Historic Environment and Knowledge Exchange Manager, and as part of that role, I am the architectural editor of the Victoria County History, which is one of our kind of biggest flagship public history, I suppose you'd call it, projects. It's nice to see Victoria here. I know that she's on the sort of steering committee for the Centre for History, Place and Community. I think that's all the right words in the right order. But the Victoria County History is about working with local historians to do local histories of their place, and them writing a history that they would understand and recognise of their place. And that really is a kind of national infrastructure of local historians that we work with and we support, but we are led by them and want them to be kind of creating a history that they recognise. And I think the IFPH is now in creating my role and kind of thinking of a role that has that sort of knowledge exchange in its title very explicitly, is very much trying to think about how we could create infrastructure for place-based research, which is led by the people in those places. And that obviously has a very specific, the VCH has a specific English focus, just because of its kind of geographical boundaries, but the IFPH is at this time thinking very much a kind of on a UK level, but then that might have a kind of a broader framework as well. Jerome, was there anything else that you kind of wanted me to comment on?
Get that kind of context, I guess. Yeah, it's really it's lovely to have you here, and as Serge was saying, and various people in my group talked a little bit about, there are kind of groups and networks and organizations that nationally that think about these issues. The question is whether we would want to map onto them, whether we want to be very distinct, or whether, you know, how that kind of connection and how it works. Other thoughts from your breakout groups, people? What do we have to say?
Kind of picks up from what Ruth was saying, you know, kind of your staff 3 question marks, all capitals comment, because so firstly, our group talked about, as Thomas says, finding underrepresented groups of practitioners, and we kind of came to the agreement that that's probably step 1. You know, before we stop thinking about institutional partnerships, before we start thinking about anything, we want to get underrepresented groups involved at the ground floor, right? Because bringing them in after everything's been set is just, well, pointless and bad practice. But then, like, we also talked quite a lot about funding, because if you're not associated with an institution like the IHR, then there's really very little way to get any kind of funding, because they're all tied, you know, all of these models, like Leverhulme Research Centers being one example, is fully tied to having a named institution to support it. And I think, given the culture of overwork, low morale, et cetera, within the UK, I think it's absolutely essential that we find a way to have some kind of real financial support / staff support. And I think probably the only way to do that is to find an institution to partner. But maybe I'm being too negative. I'm just really concerned about, you know, I think like any moment, there's a lot of energy in the room, possibly less time, but maybe time and energy, who knows? But that, you know, it's not ever going to be thus. And these sorts of initiatives often fall on, you know, just 1 or 2 people having to leave, right? For whatever personal or professional reason, having to withdraw. And I'd be really keen to think about future-proofing in that way before we do anything else. But again, maybe I'm being a bit of a downer.
No, I think the worry, we talked a little bit about definitions in our group, and the worry is that, you know, we'll just never do anything. We'll just say public history doesn't exist, and if it does, it's problematic, and no one's got any time to do it. So yeah, let's just go home. And, you know, fair enough. I can see that, but also that feels, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I think people who know me probably think that. So, you know, I think that there is, yeah, forewarned is a good idea, and thinking about anticipating issues like you talk about, Julia, is a very good idea. And we've all probably been involved with things that haven't worked because of those very reasons: time, people, whatever, and musical differences. So we just need to sort of, I think, be quite careful of that, but also be optimistic that there is enough energy in the room. You know, there's enough people who are keen and committed. I think if you do it carefully, yeah, it works. I don't know. What else? What did other people say? Hey Ruth, how are you?
I come back in and to kind of respond to this is sort of what we were talking about in our group, was despite those pressures of future proofing that Julia's quite rightly raised, there's also on the other side of that, you know, if you're tied to an institution, then that sort of clearly flags, oh, we are in some way more related to this part of history, whatever that part of history might be. And, you know, if you're trying to get a whole range of people who do history in a whole range of way involved, it's always difficult to do that when you are sitting within or alongside or connected in a dotted line to some kind of institution that has a specific reputation or identity. And so finding some way of negotiating both of those things, I think that's the biggest challenge that I think that there is, because I agree, Julia, about that kind of future-proofing and the goodwill or the time and the energy is currently, I think, not quite there from experiences of other kind of research groups or whatever it is that I've been part of, which are crumbling around me at the moment because there just isn't the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want us to be too pessimistic, but I think you're completely right. That, you know, thinking about this carefully, Jeff said in the chat as well about not wanting to be too institutional, not being too definitional. I think that's important as well, being kind of a collective. That said, we do have to have some kind of organization if we're going to do it. So it's like, on the one hand, we can be really nice and kind of like open, but also that starts to fall apart. Anyone else got comments, things that you were talking about in the chat? There's been lots of questions as well. Emmy, did you want to say a little bit, because you talked in our chat about the situation in Japan, and you then said in the chat as well, so about the usefulness of this. Where's Emmy? There she is. Hey.
Yeah. Because like public history is like, well, you know, imported through academia, and then just like it's not something happening actually out there. So it was like really useful, at least for me, when I started like doing my, you know, PhD in public history, and I wanted to know the situation in Japan, and I just, you know, Googled public history, and then there was, oh, okay, there's like this national network on public history. It is still quite a small group, but at least that was like helpful. But then when I see the situation in the UK, we already, it's pretty much happening already. Then as we've discussed in the group, like it's already happening, so it's quite difficult to make that network kind of like inclusive. So it's always challenging. So that's something I can say about the situation in the UK from, you know, as a Japanese perspective. Yeah,
that's really useful, Emmy. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that there are some great comments in the chat as well about this, like the not wanting to redo things, definitely, and maybe doing events first. Hey, Victoria.
Hello. So, I mean, I feel as though a lot of the ground that we covered in our group has already been traversed again, around sort of not wanting to redo, not wanting to sort of be creating labour that we then cannot sustain in the long term. And one of the things that we discussed in our group was the idea of an organisation which is not a sort of a federation or association in the traditional sense, because we have a lot of those kinds of organisations already internationally, but also active in the UK for various different professions and practitioners. So things like the Archives and Records Association and the Museums Association, and I think you know, a lot more have just been posted into the chat as well. That instead we might think about having some form of collective that was built around action. And I know that Julia just mentioned having kind of an online unconference, but perhaps one of the ways in which we can identify both the core values and mission of this kind of organisation is to do something, to choose a theme around which we can build a programme of activity that can engage with the various different sort of pre-existing organisations, and also, I hate the word, I just can't think of something else that covers it at the moment, but stakeholders, people who are engaged and interested in these kinds of conversations. So yeah, something which was more about making an intervention, actually producing something.
Yeah, I think that makes loads of sense. And there's a lot of love in the chat for some kind of sort of for events and for thoughts about bringing people together. I guess the response to that is we kind of are doing that already. You know, we are doing these things, and in some ways, be a part of this is the upshot of that. Linda, sorry, Linda has a hand raised. Sorry, hey Linda, sorry I missed you there. How you doing? You're on mute, I think, Linda. Sorry. You're still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yay, pretty good.
Right. So I think I might be coming from the wrong angle, but I think I think like you, Victoria, there's loads and loads of people here with loads and loads of skills. There's loads and loads of different pockets of money. Do you know what I mean? And there's loads of different people talking in the same room. And I think maybe our way is to all get behind one project. Do you know what I mean? And bring all your different skills to a project, but a project that could have bigger repercussions. So at the minute, the Rylands Library are doing the British Pop Archive, And I know about that because they've taken the Reno archive into permanent loan, which was me excavating a club which had loads of repercussions and went, but within the pop archive, there's loads of history, isn't there? There's loads of different angles of history. You know, that you could, that, you know, like it seems a bit cheesy and a bit small to go, oh, the Generation Game or David Bowie or whatever. But underneath all of that, there's fashion and music and housing and architecture. And do you know what I mean? So it might be to get behind one project and everybody start to learn, say, have a time period on that one project and everybody start to learn how to work together behind one project that could have a bigger repercussion, and also to what then talks to what we was talking about in our group, which was getting academics to talk to non-academics and build bridges and feel equal and feel interested in each other's work and learn ways to use each other's skills.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that kind of that bridge building is really useful and important. And I like the idea of one thing. I think you're absolutely right. Just focusing on one thing and then bringing everyone into that makes a lot of sense. Christine, hey, you got your hand up. Hey, Christine, how are you?
Yeah, great. How are you? I think, I mean, I really love the coalition idea, and I think it's gaining a lot of traction in this room. I do think even if it is a coalition, it still needs at least a minimum of organizational, you know, structure, doesn't it? So if it's only I don't know, you know, having a thing that can have a board and have a secretary and a president, I think, you know, it can't be 55 people writing emails to each other, obviously. Yeah, I think it's yes, I think some form of structure will be needed, even if it's starting small and, you know, just registering a network or an association. Yeah, otherwise I think these things tend to fall apart very quickly if you don't have any sort of recurring organizational structure for them.
No, I agree. I think you're right. And one of the problems is money, right? So as soon as as soon as money gets involved, you then have to, there's then legal stuff, and then it becomes a whole thing. And you have to have terms of reference, and you have to have a, you know, et cetera, and prove that you're not money laundering or whatever.
It's true. It's true, but we know it's possible.
Say again, sorry?
We know it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible, but yeah, but it's also complex. So yeah, I think you're right. So the Black Trowel Collective, I put them in the chat. They're a really useful model. I think they're a group of anarchist archaeologists, and they still have a group. They still have a kind of ethos, but it's incredibly democratic. And they essentially provide support, solidarity, and funding for people working in that area, particularly postgrads from various communities. And so it's a really handy kind of way of thinking about what might work. Hey, Edward, how are you? You have your hand up.
Hi, Jerome. Good to see you. Good to see everyone. It's great to be here. You know, everyone's made really great points. Julia was worried that she might be being a bit of a downer, but I really like this idea of thrashing out whether this is worth doing at all, because I think so often a network or a collective, Christina just used the term coalition, which has its own distinctive connotations. We regard these things as being self-evidently good. Oh, let's get this together. There's energy. We like meeting up. Let's do this. And often, you know, we're creating labor that we can't sustain, or there's energy at the beginning, but there's not the money to pursue it. But that's not a reason not to go ahead with something. But I think it just boils down to what sort of activity would the network or coalition or society affect. And annual conferences get talked about a lot. One thing we mentioned, or I raised in our discussion breakout room, was a biennial conference. Biennial. It just takes the pressure away every 2 years, and it gives people a chance to come up with something meaningful, whether it's a different theme or a different focus. And I think the way that you would future-proof it or ensure that it would be sustainable over time is to have the focus on early career historians, and ideally not only students, but people working in local and national public history institutions. There are tens of thousands of them in the United Kingdom. Every year I say this, I feel less confident about saying it now, but certainly a few years ago I could say it. You know, whatever else you might say about public history in the UK, there are jobs here compared to France or Germany or Ireland and other neighbouring states. That's less the case than it was a few years ago, but it's still a huge industry. So I think a biennial conference would be a biennial gathering would be a great beginning. You know, you don't even need to have a president or a board. You just need to have a venue and a bit of funding. And as, by the way, as Linda said, you know, all these people here, many of us have official like affiliations. And if you focused on one project, which is a biennial conference, then that would be a good way of drawing funding.
Cool. Well, so Thomas has just volunteered you, Edward, for that. So I think we're all sorted. Yeah. All right. This has been really cool. What I would like to do for a last bit is to put you back into different breakout rooms and write a manifesto. I would like you to spend 10 minutes in your rooms coming up with 1, 2, 3, or 5 or 10 points, bullet points, brief, punchy, direct, that you think are crucial for whatever this coalition, collective, group, prayer circle is going to be. So I'm going to do that. So there you go. Has everyone got their instructions? You know what you're doing? Good. All right. I'll see you in 10 minutes. There we go.
Hi, Jerome.
Hey, Malena, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Sorry, I just arrived in Manchester a few minutes ago. So
No worries.
I can enter in the breakout room.
Yeah,
So
if you don't mind.
I have to leave now. Sorry.
Oh, that's not a shame. It's really lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay. Thank you. See you later.
See you now. Take care. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
I've muted everyone apparently. What power I have. So welcome back. Thanks for your taking the time to think about this. Does anyone have some strong manifesto points they want to bring up? You would put them in the chat if you like, and we can discuss them a bit after. I'll start. Owen came up with a brilliant act first, quibble later. Owen, do you want to talk a little bit about what the motivation for that was?
Yeah, that wasn't quite the manifesto pledge I was looking for. But yeah, the basic idea was, I think a lot of these conversations are almost framed around the idea we're creating something, and we're not. We're reacting to something that already exists, both academically, publicly, but also politically. We're discussing whether or not we should set up an organization or a network or whatever it is to discuss public history and its place in the British psyche, for want of a better term, globally and locally. Ultimately, dare I say, extreme political groups have already started doing this. These already exist. So I think the idea that we can spend a long time arguing about what public history is, we can spend a long time arguing whether or not we should look at it as a British or a international or whatever. But I think kind of feeding into points that have already come up, we need to do something. And we can, quibble, and we can thrash out the specifics later. If you want your first biannual conference to be about, is our name appropriate, then there you go, you've got a theme. But ultimately, it just needs to get moving. And I think if we spend a long time pretending we're inventing something, we're missing the specifically British context of where we sit.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like the networks that we set up, Julia and I think we're definitely kind of recognizing that this is the game right now, and we need to get in it. And that this is, terrifying for people. I was talking about Corinne Fowler in the chat. She's not alone. She's not. There are lots of people who are daring to say certain things and are being, attacked horribly in various media, particularly. And even if we just kind of offer support and solidarity, I think that's useful. Proactive inclusivity, yay. Defending historians of all kinds, nice one. Julia, do you want to talk about these points?
Oh, yeah, I mean, proactive inclusivity, finding exactly, as Thomas said in the first breakout group, finding people who are groups that are underrepresented, proactively asking them what we could do for them, whether they'd be interested, etc. But I think in order to do that, we do need a manifesto saying what we're about. So there's a bit of a chicken egg situation there. And then in the true spirit of quibbling first and acting later, we got into a very important discussion that Edward first flagged, but I think we all agreed about how defending historians to do critical history might actually mitigate against point one. If we want, for instance, and this is an example, quite establishment-oriented military historians who are doing lots and lots and lots of public history, probably the biggest sector. Do we want them on board? Arguably, yes. And then how is that going to, so I think where we got to with point two is that rather than, we need to be really specific about what we mean by that, and where our red lines are, etc. But then we didn't get any further because we quibbled. We didn't quibble. We discussed.
No, I think quibbling is fine. But it was ever thus. I mean, I've been working in public history for like 15 years, and we spend a lot of time quibbling about what it actually is. And it's like, well, yeah, Owen's right. The game has been taken away from us, and we need to get sorted out. I've got all with the game metaphors right now, but yeah, I think that's going to be complex working that out. Are we saying yes to this and no to that? Hey, Edward.
Sorry, just to add to what Julia said there. I mean, I raised that point because I thought that, if you set out with this idea that you're going to represent everyone, that you simply can't do that. And I suggested that it might, most people who work in public history in the UK, whether they're volunteers or professionals in institutions, probably are fairly conservative in their worldview. So are you being exclusive to them? But then what Owen was saying has a lot of merit too. Like, stuff is fairly urgent. So maybe you make a decision at the outset that this is going to be whatever it is, the society or network is going to be self-consciously activist. and defend people like Corinne Fowler. I mean, her name's come up a lot today, but there's lots of other examples. But I just think you need to make a decision early on. So in other words, if you're happy to alienate middle of the road, small c conservatives, then that's grand. But you just need to be clear about that. What you're doing may do that.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I concur with you. Hey, Linda, you got your hand up. That's a very good hand. And you're on mute again, mate. Sorry. Still on mute. Linda, you're on mute. Sorry.
There's always a problem with language. When I looked up Corinne Fowler, I remembered it then, right? Do you know what I mean? The minute that I started reading it, I remembered it. And it's so ridiculous that they're having to go, of course those houses must come from slavery. Do you know how do you know what I mean? Like, so the answer is, how the fuck are they going to get that money if it didn't come from that in that time? Do you know, but like, so that's another part of the bridges, isn't it? That there's defending in a what's the word, in a historical academic setting where you can only say certain words in certain languages, and then there's like already having that bridge in place that someone says what I've just said, of course it fucking comes from there. Do you know what I mean? And makes it, you know, or at least one of them did. Do you know, and like then you've got David Olafingi, who can like actually trace the heritage and defend her in real terms. Do you know what I mean? Not just defend it academically, because people go on this side and people go on that side. And that in itself is public history as well, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, because in that trail, if David did start looking at that, at just one of them houses, in that trail, you would probably find family members in the area of Black family members or some, you know, like you'll find other things underneath that.
Absolutely. David's quite astonishing for what he's done, but he's also spent a lot of time defending his positions in various ways, to the point that I think he now just, as you say, doesn't give a fuck. I mean, he's just like, whatever. And I think
but exactly, so people started just saying, I don't give a fuck, I just like history. I mean, immediately everything's blown up. Do you know what I mean? It's that we keep acting within the boundaries of, do you know what I mean? Like, oh, academics do this and non-academics do that. And people who excavate the Reno smoke weed round the back. And do you know what I mean? Like, but historians smoke weed round the front. Do you know what I mean? And everyone's just lying to everybody. When, to me, like I said a really false thing before when I said, to me, public history means contemporary history to me in a way. But it doesn't really. It just means everyone that's not included in history, in it. Do you know, like that everyone that's not Henry VIII is public history, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean by that?
I do absolutely know what you mean by that.
Yeah.
Linda's made me think of another potential manifesto point, which relates to something that's going to come out in the podcast from the network conference that's coming out, I think, in a month's time. So somebody who did history tours, she's not associated with any institution or anything like that. She just does sort of radical history tours in London. And she said one thing that she really found was incredible was how once you get people talking face to face, either online or in person, the entire timbre of the conversation changes. And these kind of polarized debates that are being mitigated and inflamed largely by, you know, a very narrow set of media owners, suddenly, you know, fade away and you can talk. So maybe one of the things our organization could include is forums in which people talk to each other, in kind of create forums where people can talk across divides, potentially. I know that's messy. And
no, but that's still down to language. Sorry to jump in. Am I muted? That's down to language, because the minute you say certain words, average person won't get involved themselves. And one of them is forum, another one's symposium, there's certain words you cannot utter. Do you know what I mean? Because it immediately closes it down and makes it academic. So you've got to find some sort of middle language that includes a bit of swearing and a bit of normality. Do you know what I mean? To ignite, to get people to get in rooms together.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Cool. Has anyone? So last one, I'm going to draw this to an end in a moment because you've all been incredibly generous with your time, but it's lunchtime, isn't it? Well, it is for me. I don't know where you all are. But has anyone got any final points they would like to raise before we have a quick break? Or are we all good? I'm writing down swearing and normality. That's good. I like this, and smoking weed at the front. These are all good points that we've got here. I think we're starting to work on something. Okay, if you have thoughts that pop into your head when you're having a break, email me or let me know. I'm going to close this room now because I need to sort the recordings out and stuff like this. We will reconvene at 3 o'clock British time for Cedric Brousseau to talk to us about his project with Indigenous peoples in Canada and the Ingenium museum that he works for, which is going to be awesome. So I'll see you back there. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your time.
3 o'clock, did you say?
3 o'clock.
Okay, see you
That's the
then.
next session. So I'll see you there, guys. Have a good break, and it's really been really,
You as well. Thank you.
Bye.
Jerome, I also can't make this afternoon because I have to campaign outside my children's school to try to bring Ofsted down and burn it to the goddamn ground. But literally, I'm going to be holding a sign. I'm collecting signatures right now. Could you please put me in touch with the speaker from the afternoon? Because I'd be really keen to chat. Could you ask them if you can put me in touch?
No, totally. Cedric is the most generous man in the world. He's awesome. So I'll talk to him about that. Hey, Linda, it's really lovely to see you. Thanks for coming. I'll see you soon.
See you. Thanks, Jerome. Bye.
See you guys. Be good.